The memory is etched in gold. It is forever sunny, forever triumphant. It is the vision of Joe Montana, cool as a bay breeze, dropping back, his movements efficient and unhurried, while chaos erupts around him. It is the silver and scarlet of the San Francisco 49ers, a burst of color against the green turf of Candlestick Park. It is the precision of a pass that seems less thrown than placed, a feathery spiral landing in the hands of Jerry Rice, who turns upfield not with brutal force, but with the devastating grace of a river cutting through a canyon. It is the confetti, the Lombardi trophies, the dynasty that defined an era of football with an aura of intelligence, of finesse, of California cool. This is the story we all know. This is the birthplace of the West Coast offense. It is a perfect origin myth, clean and compelling, rising from the innovation of a genius head coach, Bill Walsh, and blossoming in the golden light of the Pacific. It is a story so powerful, so culturally resonant, that its name has become gospel. The West Coast offense. Sounds right, feels right. It evokes Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley was a cliché, a system of tomorrow born on the edge of the continent. But what if that name, that foundational piece of football identity, is a lie? What if the entire mythology is built on a geographic error, a historical misappropriation so complete it has erased the truth for decades? What if the soul of this beautiful, intricate system was forged not in the sun, but in the soot? I want you to picture a different man, in a different city watching that same glory unfold. It is January 1982, in Cincinnati, Ohio. The air is cold and carries the damp, metallic taste of the Ohio River. In a quiet study, the television glows. On the screen, Joe Montana is engineering a drive that will become legend, the final march against the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC Championship game, the one that ends with Dwight Clark's catch reaching into the sky. The man watching is in his 70s. His hair is white, his face a map of a lifetime spent on the sidelines. He is Paul Brown, the founder and general manager of the Cincinnati Bengals, a man whose name is on the stadium where his team plays. He watches the plays unfold, the short, timed passes, the running back flaring into the flat, the tight end on a shallow cross. He recognizes every concept, every rhythm, every taught progression. He knows them intimately, not as a fan, but as an architect. He built them. He designed these very blueprints years earlier for a different team in this very city. And now, he watches his own creation being crowned as the innovation of another, bearing a name that distances it from him and his city forever. The West Coast offense. The phrase must have tasted like ash. There was no champagne for him, only the quiet, profound injustice of a thief being celebrated while the true inventor sat in the shadows, his contribution reduced to a footnote. The contrast is chilling. On one coast, a dynasty is born, wrapped in the glamorous narrative of revival and genius. On the other, in the gritty, overlooked heart of the industrial Midwest, the actual creation site sits in obscurity. The story of the West Coast offense is the story of how football history gets written, and more importantly, how it gets rewritten. It is a tale of how a narrative, once it achieves critical mass, can erase fact and replace it with a more convenient, more marketable truth. It exposes the fragility of legacy. For Bill Walsh, the name cemented his reputation as a revolutionary, a maverick who changed the game from the left coast. For Paul Brown, it was a final, cruel twist in a career marked by both monumental achievement and personal slights. His own pupil had not stolen the playbook. Walsh was too honorable for that. He had simply taken the shared intellectual child of their Cincinnati years and raised it in a more famous home. The world named it after the adoptive parent, and the biological father was politely forgotten. This is not merely a semantic argument, a trivial correction for football historians. This is about the essence of innovation itself. True innovation is often born not in the spotlight, but in the laboratory of necessity. It is forged in struggle with limited tools, by problem solvers staring at constraints. The glittering finale on the world stage is just the final act. The real drama, the messy, brilliant, and human act of creation, happened somewhere else. It happened in the mind of a relentless, organized visionary in Cleveland and later Cincinnati, and it was nurtured by an assistant coach with a professor's intellect. It was born from the practical need to protect a weak offensive line and a quarterback who couldn't throw the ball 60 yards. It was mathematics made manifest on grass. Completion percentage as a weapon, ball control as a religion, the short pass as an extended handoff. It was, in every schematic and philosophical sense, a Cincinnati offense. And then it moved to California, and history performed a magic trick. The system shed its Rust Belt origins and was reborn in a halo of gold. The name followed the geography of its greatest success, not the geography of its birth. So we begin here, at the pinnacle of the myth, in the warmth of San Francisco's glory. But we will turn our gaze east, across the mountains and the plains, to the river city where it all began. We will follow the path of an idea from its conception in the mind of Paul Brown, through its adolescence under the tutelage of Bill Walsh in Cincinnati, through its exile and refinement, to its spectacular coming-of-age party on the West Coast, where it was given a name that hid its true parentage. This is a story about football, but it is also a story about memory, about credit, about how culture annexes innovation. It is about the quiet man in Cincinnati, watching his life's work be renamed before his eyes. The question hangs in the air, as persistent as a fog over the bay. What do we call something when its name is a lie? This documentary is an act of historical reclamation. Our mission is to correct a record written in the winds of a dynasty but blurred by the passage of time and the allure of a good story. We are not here to diminish the glory of the San Francisco 49ers or the profound genius of Bill Walsh. Their achievements are permanent, towering landmarks in the sport's history. Instead, we are here to restore a foundational truth, to trace the lineage of the most influential offensive scheme in football history back to its proper source. This is the story of the West Coast offense, a system that never truly came from the West Coast. It is a story about how an idea, born in the pragmatic mind of one man in the American Midwest, was adopted, perfected, and ultimately renamed by another, its origins obscured by geography and triumph. To understand this is to understand how sports legends are forged, not just on the field, but in the narratives we choose to believe. The central characters in this drama are two of the most consequential figures the game has ever known, bound by mentorship, innovation, and a complicated legacy. First, Paul Brown. His name is institutional, literally on stadiums and franchises. He is the stoic, relentless architect from Massillon, Ohio, a man who professionalized coaching itself. He was not a warm presence. He was a force of organization and discipline. He believed in the systematization of football, removing randomness through repetition and intellectual preparation. By the time he was building the Cincinnati Bengals from expansion scratch in 1968, he was already a legend, but a legend with a point to prove after his shocking dismissal from the Cleveland Browns years earlier. Then there is Bill Walsh, the assistant with the restless mind, the professor. Hired by Brown in Cincinnati, Walsh was the sensitive intellectual to Brown's austere CEO. He was obsessed with the psychology of the game, the teaching of technique, the layered complexity of the passing game. Their partnership in Cincinnati was the crucible. Brown provided the foundational mandate for a safe, efficient, short passing system to protect a vulnerable team. Walsh, the brilliant translator, began to give it detailed language, rhythm, and depth. This is the core relationship, the inventor and the sublime engineer. And then there are the places. Cincinnati, Ohio, a river city defined by grit, by industry, by a blue-collar identity. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, it was not a glamorous NFL outpost. It was a hardscrabble franchise trying to find its footing. The football played there was meant to be smart, resourceful, and survivalist. This is the soil in which the offense grew. Contrast this with San Francisco, California, a world away in spirit and style. By the late 1970s, it was a city of counterculture and burgeoning technology, but its football team was a laughingstock. The 49ers were a blank canvas, a tragedy. When Walsh arrived there in 1979, he brought with him the fully realized system from Cincinnati, now infused with years of further reflection at Stanford. In San Francisco, with the serendipitous gift of Joe Montana, the system found its ultimate expression and its defining locale. The geography branded the philosophy. The West Coast label stuck not because of where it was conceived, but because of where it became beautiful and champions were made. This leads us to the powerful, unsettling questions at the heart of our investigation. Why did this offensive philosophy only become iconic after it migrated west with Bill Walsh? The answer lies in a confluence of factors: the presence of a perfect quarterback, the accumulation of Walsh's coaching maturity, and the stark contrast his elegant system presented to the bruising, vertical attacks that dominated the NFL consciousness. It was a stylistic revolution that needed the right stage. San Francisco provided the spotlight. Cincinnati had been the rehearsal room. More crucially, how did its origins in Paul Brown's Cincinnati become erased from the popular narrative? This is a lesson in the mechanics of sports history. History is written by the victors, and the victors were unequivocally the 49ers. The media, searching for a shorthand for Walsh's dazzling scheme, naturally linked it to his location. The term West Coast offense was a journalist's creation, not Walsh's. It was a descriptive label that hardened into historical fact. Paul Brown, sitting in Cincinnati, was in no position to reframe the narrative. He was an opposing general manager, not a publicist. His contributions were acknowledged in passing, as a footnote of influence, while the system itself carried the name of its point of greatest success. What does this say about how football history is written? It reveals that our understanding of innovation is often simplistic and destination-obsessed. We celebrate the flowering but neglect the root. We associate breakthroughs with the moment they change the world, not the often longer, quieter period of their development. The West Coast offense is a case study in this phenomenon. It shows how a brand can overwrite a biography. For decades, fans and analysts have spoken of Walsh's offense as if it sprang fully formed from his mind in California. This obscures the essential truth that it was a collaborative, evolutionary idea, born from a specific set of problems in Cincinnati and shepherded to maturity by Walsh over a decade of work. This documentary will trace that evolution step by step, from the first calculated completions by Virgil Carter in a Bengals uniform to the iconic passes from Montana to Clark and Rice. We will delve into the game film that proves the continuity. We will explore the personal dynamics between the meticulous Brown and the creative Walsh, a relationship that was both fruitful and fraught. We will examine the cultural forces that allowed a Midwestern innovation to be repackaged as a coastal revolution. And we will confront the legacy of this misnomer. How does it shape the way we remember Paul Brown's late career genius? How does it simplify the complex journey of Bill Walsh? The West Coast offense is more than a playbook. It is the DNA of the modern passing game, found in every huddle in the league today. But its story is a reminder that in sports, as in all things, origin stories matter. They are about credit, about truth, and about honoring the full, complicated path of an idea. We begin our journey not in the sunshine of Candlestick Park, but in the pragmatic heart of the Midwest, at the drawing board of a man who believed football could be solved, and in the mind of the assistant who helped improve it. The story of the most elegant offensive system in football history begins not with inspiration, but with calculation. Not with a flash of genius, but with a grim assessment of weakness. It begins in Cincinnati, Ohio in the year 1970, with a man who had already revolutionized the sport once, now facing the most pragmatic challenge of his career. Paul Brown was in exile. His dismissal from the Cleveland Browns in 1963, the team he named, built, and led to perennial championships, was a profound and personal wound. The man who invented the modern playbook, the classroom film session, and the face mask had been cast aside by an owner who wanted a new voice. When he accepted the challenge of building the expansion Cincinnati Bengals in 1968, it was not just a new job. It was a mission to prove once and for all that his system, his way, was immutable. But by 1970, the reality of an expansion team was a cold shower. The Bengals had talent, but it was thin and uneven. Specifically, the offensive line was a patchwork, unable to consistently sustain the blocking required for a deep drop, vertical passing game, or a bruising run scheme. And his quarterback, a veteran named Virgil Carter, was a smart and agile player, but his arm was considered, at best, average. Carter could not throw the ball 60 yards with authority. In the conventional football wisdom of the era, this was a fatal flaw. A quarterback with a weak arm was a liability. But Paul Brown did not see liabilities, he saw parameters. And within those parameters, he began to design a solution. The system that would later be christened with a sunny, coastal name was born here, in the gray industrial heartland, from a simple, unsentimental question. How do you win when you cannot physically overpower your opponent? Brown's answer was to reinvent the geometry of the field. If his quarterback could not attack the defense vertically over great distance, they would attack it horizontally, and then vertically after the catch. If his offensive line could not protect for 5 and 7-step drops, the ball would have to come out in 2 or 3 steps. This was not a philosophical preference for artistry. It was a mathematical imperative for survival. The playbook became an exercise in constrained optimization. The primary objective shifted from the explosive downfield shot to the certain repeated completion. Completion percentage ceased to be a mere statistic and became the central weapon. A completed pass, Brown reasoned, was the most efficient play in football. It avoided the risk of a loss on a running play. It avoided the catastrophe of a sack or an interception on a forced deep throw. It was a guaranteed positive gain, and more importantly, it kept the chain moving, the clock ticking, and his own defense off the field. This was ball control reimagined, not through 3 yards and a cloud of dust, but through 5 yards and a cloud of certainty. The calculus was pure Brown. Eliminate risk, control tempo, frustrate the opponent with a death by 1,000 paper cuts. He began to install a repertoire of short, timed passing routes, quick slants, shallow crosses, swing passes to running backs, checkdowns to tight ends. The progression for the quarterback was simplified. Read the defense's alignment, determine the point of least resistance, and deliver the ball on rhythm. The receiver's job was no longer just to catch the ball, but to catch it in stride and immediately become a runner. This was the birth of a conscious, coached emphasis on yards after catch, or YAC. The play was not designed to end with the reception. It was designed to begin with it. Virgil Carter, the quarterback with the so-called weak arm, became the unlikely test pilot for this experiment. Carter was, in many ways, the perfect avatar for the system's logic. He was an intelligent, analytical player, a former academic All-American. He lacked cannon strength, but he possessed quick feet and a quick mind. Under Brown's direction, and with significant input from his offensive assistant Bill Walsh, Carter began to operate this new machine. The results in the 1970 season were quietly historic. While the Bengals finished a respectable 8-6, it was the manner of their play that signaled a quiet revolution. Virgil Carter led the entire NFL in completion percentage that year, a staggering fact for a quarterback on an expansion team. He was not throwing the ball away. He was executing the system. The offense was methodical, frustratingly efficient for opponents. It did not look powerful in the traditional sense. There were few highlight reel bombs. Instead, it was a relentless, ticking metronome of 5-, 7- and 9-yard gains. First down after first down. The running game, often a draw or a delay, worked in concert with the short passes, each making the other more effective by forcing defenders to respect both the immediate pass and the potential run after the catch. I think about the mindset required to birth this system. This was not a young, fiery coach trying to make a name for himself with a flashy gimmick. This was Paul Brown, an established legend in his 60s, deliberately deconstructing the conventional offensive wisdom he had helped establish. There was a profound humility in this approach. He was submitting his own football ideology to the evidence on the ground. His team was weak in traditional areas, so he would change the definition of strength. He turned a limitation, Carter's arm, into the guiding principle. The offense was built not around the talent of a superstar, but around the mitigation of weakness. This is the crucial, overlooked genesis of the West Coast offense. It is the antithesis of the freewheeling, creative image it later acquired. Its core is conservative, risk-averse, and intellectually rigid. It is football as applied engineering. Bill Walsh, watching and contributing from the sidelines as the receivers coach and then offensive coordinator, was absorbing this lesson in real time. He saw how Brown's system empowered the quarterback intellectually while protecting him physically. He saw how it could demoralize a defense not with one brutal strike, but with a sustained, inexorable pressure, like water eroding stone. The beauty that would later become associated with Walsh's 49ers was, in its Cincinnati infancy, purely functional. It was beautiful only in its efficiency, in its logical purity. So, in the river chill of Cincinnati during the 1970 season, the DNA was sequenced. The foundational principles, high percentage, short passing as an extension of the run game, rhythmic, quick quarterback releases, an obsessive focus on YAC, and the use of completions to control the clock and the game's tempo were all established. They were born from necessity, codified by a relentless organizer, and executed by a smart quarterback who fit the prototype. No one called it the West Coast offense. They likely had no name for it at all. It was simply Paul Brown's solution to the problem of the Cincinnati Bengals. It was a system designed to win in the trenches of the AFC Central, not to dazzle on Monday Night Football. But within its pragmatic, Midwestern heart beat the rhythm that would someday become a symphony. The inventor had built the engine. It would fall to his brilliant apprentice to perfect the bodywork, to add the artistry, and, through a twist of fate and geography, to drive it onto a stage where it would receive a name that spoke nothing of its origin. If Paul Brown was the architect, drafting the blueprints with a firm, unsentimental hand, then Bill Walsh was the master craftsman who studied every line, understood the weight each beam was meant to bear, and began to imagine the graceful flourishes that could be added without compromising the structure. Walsh's apprenticeship under Brown in Cincinnati was not merely a job. It was a graduate-level education in the systematization of football, a period where the philosophical pillars of what would become a dynasty were quietly, meticulously erected. Their relationship was the defining alchemy of this story. The stoic, disciplined patriarch and the intense, intellectual protégé. It was within the confines of this dynamic, a blend of reverence and friction, that the cold mathematics of Brown's system began to acquire a soul, a psychology, and a teachable gospel. Walsh arrived in Cincinnati in 1968, hired as the receivers coach, a man with a journeyman's resume and a professor's mind. He had bounced from Oakland to San Diego, carrying with him a reputation for being brilliant but perhaps too thoughtful, too sensitive for the meat grinder culture of professional football. Paul Brown, the ultimate systematizer, saw something else. He saw a mind that could grasp complexity and translate it into instruction. Brown's world was one of order. Practices scheduled to the minute, dress codes enforced, a clean, corporate distance maintained between the coach and his players. Walsh, though respectful of the structure, operated on a different frequency. He was fascinated not just by the what of football but by the why. He believed the game was won not only by physical execution but by psychological preparation, by the cultivation of confidence, by the subtle warfare of anticipation and deception. The mentor-protégé dynamic was complex, a dance of mutual respect shadowed by generational and temperamental differences. Brown was from the old school, a commanding presence who believed in execution through discipline and fear of failure. His innovation was organizational, not interpersonal. Walsh, though in awe of Brown's football intellect, chafed at the austere environment. He believed players, especially skill players like receivers and quarterbacks, needed to be nurtured, their confidence carefully built layer by layer. He saw teaching as an act of connection. Where Brown issued directives, Walsh offered explanations. This difference in method became the first major contribution Walsh made to the emerging system. He became its primary translator. Brown conceived the strategic framework, the need for short passes, the timing, the control. Walsh, working with the receivers and later as the offensive coordinator, began to build the intricate lexicon within that framework. He taught receivers not just to run a route, but to understand how that route broke the leverage of a specific coverage. He broke down the subtleties of the break, the head fake, the hand positioning to shield a defender. Precision was no longer just a demand. It was a detailed science, and Walsh was its passionate professor. This cultivation of precision was Walsh's obsession. He conducted film sessions that were less about punishment and more about revelation. He would show a receiver exactly how a 1-inch variance in his stem could cause a defensive back to open his hips a fraction early, creating the window for the catch. He preached the sanctity of the quarterback's footwork, tying each drop step to a specific read and throwing lane. The system required synchronization, a rhythmic harmony between passer and receiver that could only be achieved through thousands of repetitions of perfectly patterned movement. Under Walsh's tutelage, the Cincinnati offense became a laboratory for this precision. He was developing what he later called the standard of performance, a detailed catalog of expectations for every position, on every play, in every situation. This was not Paul Brown's invention. This was Walsh's profound embellishment on Brown's theme. Brown built the engine to be reliable. Walsh was polishing every component to a mirror finish, seeking not just reliability, but flawless elegance. The third philosophical pillar Walsh began to solidify was psychological warfare. Brown's approach was to overpower an opponent with preparation and mistake-free football. Walsh dreamed of outthinking them, of getting inside their defensive coordinator's head and staying there. He started to layer the playbook with what he called constraints or answer plays. The core tenet was simple. For every defensive tactic, there was a built-in counter within the system's structure. If a defense aggressively jumped the short routes, a pump fake and a deeper route behind them was already wired into the quarterback's progression. This made the offense self-correcting and, more importantly, it bred a paralyzing hesitation in the defense. He taught his players to see the game in sequences, to set up opponents with a tendency only to break it at the most damaging moment. This was chess, not checkers. Walsh's fascination with psychology extended to his own players. He worked to instill a poised, almost detached confidence. He wanted his quarterback to feel in control of the chaos, his receivers to believe they were always open. In Cincinnati, he was testing these theories on a smaller scale, but the foundational belief was cemented. Football was a mental contest as much as a physical one, and the offense could wield a psychological advantage through its design and its preparation. One can imagine the quiet intensity of those Cincinnati meeting rooms. Paul Brown, at the front, laying out the strategic objective for the week. Control the ball, avoid turnovers, exploit the specific defensive tendency. Then Walsh, taking the floor, using the chalkboard to diagram not just the play, but the myriad reactions and counters, his voice passionate, his eyes alight with the intellectual puzzle of it all. He was internalizing Brown's core commandment, the systematic removal of chance, while expanding its application into the realms of technique and mind games. He was, in essence, writing the detailed commentary on Brown's seminal text. Their relationship was not without its tensions. Walsh, for all his reverence, believed deeply in his own ideas and could be stubborn. Brown, the absolute authority, was not always open to suggestions from an assistant. There is a famous, telling anecdote from their time together. Walsh had designed a clever short passing play that worked perfectly in practice. Brown watched it and dismissed it as a sissy play. Walsh was crushed, but the moment encapsulates their dichotomy. Brown saw football through a prism of toughness and direct power, even within a finesse system. Walsh saw it as an intellectual exercise where artistry was power. This apprenticeship, stretching from 1968 through the 1975 season, was the formative period of Bill Walsh's football life. Everything he later became, the iconic leader of the 49ers, the revered genius, was built upon the foundation poured by Paul Brown in Cincinnati. From Brown, he learned the non-negotiable value of organization, the strategic primacy of ball control, and the courageous willingness to build a system around limitation. From his own instincts, he added the layers of meticulous teaching, the cult of precision, and the psychological depth. By the time Walsh left Cincinnati, first for San Diego and then for Stanford, the system was no longer just Paul Brown's pragmatic solution. It had become, through Walsh's cultivation, a comprehensive football philosophy. It was ready for its own destiny, carrying the indelible fingerprints of both men. Yet, the mentor, the original architect, remained in Cincinnati, running his version of the machine. The protégé was now departing, the blueprint in his satchel, about to seek a canvas where he could paint the masterpiece they had jointly conceived. The system was leaving the Ohio Valley, but its heart, its foundational code, would always bear the stamp of its birthplace and its first, most demanding teacher. The 1970 Cincinnati Bengals season stands not as a glorious championship run, but as a quiet, meticulously documented laboratory experiment. It is the clinical trial where the hypotheses of Paul Brown and Bill Walsh were tested under the stark lights of regular season competition, and the results, while not making national headlines, were statistically profound and philosophically revolutionary. To view this season as merely an 8-6 record for a second-year expansion team is to miss the point entirely. This was the proof of concept. On the fields of the American Football League, in games against the Raiders, the Chiefs, and the Browns, the core tenets of the system were being validated play by play, completion by completion. This was the unnoticed birth of a new football language, spoken fluently by a quarterback nobody wanted and executed by a team everyone overlooked. The revolution was not televised. It was buried in the fine print of the weekly stats sheet. The catalyst was, of course, Virgil Carter. By the fourth game of the season, with the Bengals struggling, Paul Brown made the decisive move. He benched the stronger-armed but less efficient Greg Cook, who was battling a career-ending injury, and installed Carter as the starter. Carter was not a prototypical franchise quarterback. He was undersized, his arm strength was a topic of debate, but his mind was quick and his feet were quicker. He was, in essence, the perfect prototype for the system Brown and Walsh were building. A distributor, a point guard, a decision-maker whose primary weapon was accuracy and timing, not brute force. The change was immediate. The offense began to hum with a different rhythm. The drives grew longer. The turnovers decreased. The ball came out of Carter's hand with a rapid, almost metronomic consistency. He wasn't waiting for receivers to come open downfield. He was throwing them open in short areas, relying on precise route running and his own anticipation. The offensive line, still a weakness, was protected by the sheer speed of his release. The system was designed to make the quarterback's job easier, and in Carter, it found a player intelligent enough to embrace that simplicity and execute it without ego. The numbers from that season tell a story that should have shattered conventional wisdom. When the 1970 season concluded, Virgil Carter had completed a league-leading 62.2% of his passes. This was not merely the best in the AFL. It was an astronomical figure for the era. For context, the average completion percentage in the NFL that year hovered around 51%. Carter's achievement was a statistical outlier so significant it demanded explanation. The explanation was the system. The playbook was a curated collection of high-percentage throws. Quick slants to wideout Chip Myers, shallow crosses to tight end Bob Trumpy, and a plethora of screens and swing passes to running back Jess Phillips. The play-action pass, off the team's effective but unspectacular running game, became a deadly tool because linebackers, fearing the short pass, would bite hard on the run fake. The entire offensive approach was a concerted effort to manipulate defensive coverage to create easy, safe throwing lanes. Carter's job was to find the lane and hit it on time. He was the embodiment of the new math. Completions equal first downs equal possession, possession equals control, and control equals victory. We can point to specific games that served as definitive case studies. A pivotal moment came in a November showdown against the powerful Oakland Raiders at Riverfront Stadium. The Raiders, with their notorious vertical passing attack and fearsome defense, represented the polar opposite football philosophy. The Bengals' game plan was a pure distillation of the system. Carter attempted 30 passes. He completed 20 of them, a solid 66%, for 237 yards. But the telling statistic was the distribution. The vast majority of those completions were for short to intermediate gains. He methodically moved the chains, connecting with 7 different receivers. The Bengals held the ball for over 36 minutes, keeping the Raiders' explosive offense on the sideline. Cincinnati won the game 31-17. It was a victory of intellect over athleticism, of system over star power. Another telling performance came in a December game against the Houston Oilers. Carter was surgical, completing 17 of 22 passes for 203 yards and a touchdown, again with no interceptions. The touchdown pass itself was a textbook example of the offense's philosophy. It was not a long bomb. It was a perfectly timed, 7-yard out route to wide receiver Eric Crabtree, who caught the ball in stride at the sideline and barely broke the plane of the goal line. The value was not in the spectacular throw, but in the flawless execution of a rehearsed play against a specific coverage. It was a manufactured score, the result of film study and repetitive practice. The role of the receivers in this laboratory was crucial. They were not just pass catchers, they were run-after-catch specialists. Bill Walsh, as their position coach, drilled into them the paramount importance of the third step. The step after the catch that determined whether they fell forward for 2 more yards or broke a tackle for 10. Bob Trumpy, the athletic tight end, became a nightmare matchup for linebackers in the shallow middle. Chip Myers, a possession receiver, mastered the art of the quick slant and the sideline comeback. The system demanded they be where they were supposed to be, exactly when they were supposed to be there. Carter's trust in that precision allowed him to release the ball before they made their final break. This symbiosis between quarterback and receiver, forged in countless hours of practice, was the engine of the efficiency. It was a quiet revolution in the AFL, a league known for its flamboyant passing attacks. While the Raiders went deep and the Chiefs used speed and trickery, the Bengals were implementing something subtler and, in its way, more radical. An offense that voluntarily surrendered the home run swing in favor of a relentless, disciplined string of singles and doubles. Yet why was this revolution so quiet? Why did the football world not sit up and take notice of Virgil Carter leading the league in completion percentage? The reasons are multifaceted. The Bengals were still an expansion team, and their 8-6 finish, while respectable, left them out of the playoffs. They were not on national television. Their style of play was not aesthetically thrilling in the conventional sense. It was efficient, not explosive. Furthermore, the narrative around Carter was constrained by the old paradigm. Scouts and commentators saw his lack of a powerful arm and categorized him as a game manager, a label often tinged with condescension. They attributed his high completion percentage to a conservative scheme, missing the point that the scheme itself was the innovation. They saw the symptom short passes but failed to diagnose the underlying philosophical disease that was infecting the rest of the league. The belief that you could win by never making the big mistake, by always taking what the defense gave you, and by defining what the defense gave you through pre-snap manipulation and precise play design. The 1970 Cincinnati Bengals season was the controlled experiment that proved the hypothesis. In the laboratory of Riverfront Stadium, Paul Brown's theory of risk-averse, possession-based football, and Bill Walsh's emphasis on precision teaching and psychological design were validated. Virgil Carter was the successful trial subject. The data was irrefutable. The system worked. It could take a quarterback with physical limitations and make him the most accurate passer in professional football. It could take an expansion team and make it competitive against established powers. The laboratory doors were now open. The formula was proven. But the innovators faced a crossroads. Paul Brown would continue to refine the formula in Cincinnati. Bill Walsh, his apprenticeship complete, would soon leave, taking the detailed notes from this seminal experiment with him. The knowledge gained in this quiet Midwestern laboratory was about to be packaged, enhanced, and sold to the world under a brand name that would forever obscure the location of its origin. The science was settled. The marketing campaign was just about to begin. The fracture in the story, the moment the shared creation was cleaved in two, came not with a shouting match or a scandal, but with a quiet, devastating decision. By 1975, Bill Walsh had served under Paul Brown for 8 seasons. He was no longer just the receivers coach. He was the offensive coordinator, the intellectual engine of the Bengals attack, the man who had helped design and implement the system that had made Virgil Carter a statistical phenomenon and had given the young franchise an identity. When the head coaching position at Cincinnati became vacant, Walsh, by every metric of preparation and contribution, was the logical successor. He was the protégé ready to ascend. But Paul Brown, the man who valued loyalty but operated within a code of authority that was utterly his own, looked past his brilliant assistant. Instead, he promoted from within, naming Bill Tiger Johnson, the offensive line coach, as the new head coach. The message was as clear as it was brutal. To Brown, Walsh was the brilliant theoretician, the professor, but perhaps not the leader of men he envisioned. Perhaps he was too cerebral, too sensitive, too much his own man. The Passover was a profound and personal betrayal. For Walsh, it was more than a career setback. It was a repudiation of his entire football identity by the man whose approval he craved most. The mentor had rejected the heir. The system now had two potential custodians: its inventor, who remained in Cincinnati, and its exiled architect, who was forced to carry the blueprints out into the wilderness. Walsh's departure from Cincinnati was steeped in a bitterness he would never fully shed. He described feeling disenfranchised, a scientist cast out of his own laboratory. He took a job as the offensive coordinator for the San Diego Chargers under Tommy Prothro, a move that geographically and philosophically felt like a descent. If Cincinnati was the pragmatic heartland, San Diego was a football purgatory. The Chargers were a struggling franchise, and more critically, Prothro did not fully embrace Walsh's systemic vision. Walsh found himself trying to graft his sophisticated, timing-based passing concepts onto an organization and a quarterback, primarily Dan Fouts, who was then young and interception-prone, that were not fully built to receive them. It was a period of immense frustration. He was trying to teach a graduate-level course in a room that was still learning the alphabet. The Chargers' offense was inconsistent, and Walsh, the perfectionist, chafed under the limitations. This San Diego interlude was the darkest part of the exile. It was proof that the system was not magic. It required complete institutional buy-in from the head coach down. Without the authority to install it fully, without the ability to select the players who fit its precise specifications, Walsh was just a clever play caller, not a program builder. The wilderness was teaching him a harsh lesson. Innovation without autonomy is just noise. It was at Stanford University in 1977, where the exile transformed from a punishment into a period of essential, luminous refinement. Returning to the college game, Walsh found something he had lacked in San Diego and had been denied in Cincinnati: absolute control. As head coach, he was now the CEO of his football universe. He could install every facet of the system without compromise. He could recruit and mold the specific types of players who thrived within it: intelligent quarterbacks, precise route runners, pass-catching running backs. The college setting, away from the glaring, impatient spotlight of the NFL, became the perfect incubator. Here, Walsh wasn't just refining X's and O's. He was refining himself. He was developing his standard of performance, codifying the detailed expectations for every person in the program. He was honing his teaching methods, learning how to communicate complex ideas to younger players. He was also experimenting psychologically, building the culture of poised confidence that would later define his 49ers. At Stanford, he had the freedom to fail on a smaller stage, but more importantly, he had the freedom to perfect. The system itself evolved in the Palo Alto sunlight. While the core Cincinnati principles remained, the short, high-percentage passing as an extension of the run, the rhythmic quarterback play, Walsh expanded the playbook dramatically. He introduced more motion and shifting to create pre-snap confusion for defenses. He further developed the concept of the safety valve, ensuring every pass play had a built-in, immediate outlet for the quarterback under pressure. He tailored the offense to the talents of a quarterback like Guy Benjamin, and later Steve Dills, smart players who could process information quickly and deliver the ball with accuracy. The results were spectacular and, for the first time, nationally noted. In his second year, 1978, Walsh led Stanford to an 8-4 record and a victory in the Bluebonnet Bowl. The team was celebrated for its exciting, clever offense. It was here that the football media began to take serious notice of Bill Walsh, not as Paul Brown's assistant, but as an innovative head coach in his own right. The genius label, so often later applied, found its first traction on the college sidelines. This period was crucial for Walsh's confidence. He had proven, to himself most of all, that his philosophy could be the foundation of a winning program. He had moved from being a theorist to a proven executive. The exile, therefore, was not a detour. It was a necessary pilgrimage. Had Walsh been named head coach of the Bengals in 1976, he would have been operating under the long shadow of Paul Brown, likely still constrained by the founder's overarching authority. He would have been implementing their system in Brown City. By being cast out, Walsh was forced to own the system completely. It became his. The bitterness of the rejection fueled a desire to prove Brown wrong, to demonstrate that his way was not just viable but superior. The struggles in San Diego taught him the non-negotiable requirement of total control. The success at Stanford provided the evidence and the confidence that he was ready for the NFL's ultimate test. The system that emerged from Stanford in 1979 was no longer just the Cincinnati offense. It was the Cincinnati offense filtered through Walsh's painful experiences, polished by his intellectual curiosity, and battle-tested under his sole command. It was richer, more layered, more psychologically nuanced. It was ready for its star turn. The professor had left the academy, degree in hand, and was now looking for a professional canvas upon which to paint his masterpiece. The wilderness had clarified his vision, hardened his resolve, and prepared him for the call that would change everything. He just needed a team desperate enough and broken enough to give him the keys without question. That team was waiting for him in San Francisco, a city that knew nothing of Cincinnati's pragmatism, but was about to become the stage for the most beautifully misnamed revolution in sports history. The city of San Francisco in 1979 was a place of cultural renaissance, but its football team was a monument to utter despair. The 49ers were not just bad. They were a profound and systemic failure, a franchise that had lost its way in every conceivable manner. They had just completed a 2-14 season, the worst record in their history. The front office was chaotic. The roster was a mismatched collection of fading veterans and unproven draft picks, and the fan base had retreated into apathy or outright hostility. Candlestick Park was less a cathedral of football and more a windswept mausoleum for misplaced hopes. The team cycled through coaches and quarterbacks with a dizzying lack of direction. This was not a sleeping giant. It was a comatose patient, and the prognosis was terminal. Into this void stepped Edward DeBartolo Jr., the young owner, who knew he needed not a coach, but a savior, a visionary who could perform a root and branch reconstruction of the entire organization. His search led him to a man who had just been named the College Coach of the Year at Stanford, a man whose name was whispered in knowledgeable circles as an offensive genius, but who carried the stigma of the NFL exile, Bill Walsh. The hiring was not celebrated. It was met with skepticism. Walsh was seen as a college coach, a cerebral tactician, perhaps too soft for the brutal, cynical world of the professional game. But DeBartolo saw past the conventional wisdom. He saw the architect. He gave Walsh an unprecedented 5-year contract, a lifeline of patience in an impatient league, and the absolute authority to tear everything down. The first element of the perfect storm was in place. A desperate franchise willing to hand total control to a singular, unproven philosopher. Walsh walked into a locker room that reeked of defeat. The culture was broken. Losing had become ingrained, a toxic habit. His first task was not to install a playbook, but to install a mindset. He began with what he knew best, teaching. He treated his professional players like students, patiently explaining the why behind every drill, every assignment, every formation. He preached his standard of performance, a meticulous code of conduct that extended from how to run a precise out route to how to dress for team travel. He was rebuilding not just a team, but an entire professional ethos from the ground up. The veterans, accustomed to a different style, were wary. Some dismissed him as a professor in a brutal man's game. But Walsh was undeterred. He began the painful process of roster turnover, identifying players who were not just talented, but intelligent and coachable players who could thrive in a system that valued precision over pure power. He was looking for specific components to fit his complex machine. And as he and his staff began to evaluate the roster and plan for the draft, they held the 3rd overall pick. The conventional need was glaring. A pass rusher, a defensive cornerstone. The football world expected them to take a defensive end. But Walsh, the system builder, was thinking differently. He was thinking about the one position that could make his entire vision come to life: quarterback. The 1979 NFL draft was not considered a landmark quarterback class. The clear prize was Jack Thompson, the throw-in Samoan from Washington State, a strong-armed classic pocket passer who went 3rd to Cincinnati. The next quarterback taken was Phil Simms. By the New York Giants at 7. Sitting there at the end of the 3rd round with the 82nd overall pick was a player who had divided scouts for years. His name was Joe Montana, At Notre Dame, he had been brilliant, iconic, the master of the dramatic comeback. But the scouting reports were a catalog of doubts. He was too skinny, his arm strength was merely good, not great, he didn't have the prototypical size, and some questioned whether his college magic was more luck than repeatable skill. He was a winner, but the NFL saw a project, a fragile talent who might not withstand the physical punishment. To Bill Walsh, watching film in the 49ers' war room, Montana was not a project. He was the find of a lifetime. Walsh saw past the perceived weaknesses and saw the exact constellation of traits his system demanded. He saw uncanny accuracy, especially on the move. He saw preternatural poise under pressure, a calmness in the eye of the storm that could not be taught. He saw quick feet, allowing him to reset and throw from within the pocket's crumbling confines. He saw a processor, a player who could make quick decisions and deliver the ball on time. Montana's weak arm was, in Walsh's system, irrelevant. The system did not demand 60-yard lasers. It demanded 5-yard bullets delivered with flawless timing. In Montana, Walsh saw the perfect human catalyst for his chemical reaction. The selection was a shock to many, a head-scratcher for a team with so many needs. But for Walsh, it was the second critical element of the storm falling into place. The acquisition of the perfect, undervalued instrument for his symphony. Now the alignment began. The man, the system, and the player converged in the fog of San Francisco. Walsh did not anoint Montana the starter immediately. The 1979 season was a brutal tutorial, a 2-14 repeat that tested everyone's resolve. Montana started some games, showed flashes, but also the expected rookie struggles. The system was being installed piece by piece, player by player, and the losses mounted. But within the misery, a connection was being forged. Walsh worked with Montana tirelessly, not to overhaul him, but to refine him. He simplified the reads, emphasizing the rhythm and timing of the short passing game. He taught Montana to use his mobility not to run, but to buy an extra half-second to find the safety valve. He built his confidence, treating him as the chosen one, the quarterback whose unique skills were not compromises, but prerequisites for success in this specific offense. Montana, for his part, absorbed the teaching like a sponge. He understood the intellectual beauty of the system, how it was designed to protect him and to create easy throws. His natural calmness allowed him to execute under pressure without panic, to take the check down, to live for the next play. He was not trying to force a highlight, he was trying to execute a play. This symbiosis was the final, magical element of the storm. Walsh had the system and the authority. Montana had the preternatural talent to execute it under fire. The franchise, stripped to its studs, provided a blank slate with no entrenched veterans to complain about a new, complicated way of playing football. Everyone was learning together. By the start of the 1980 season, the clouds were parting. Montana won the starting job. The system, now in its second year of installation, began to click. The offensive line, rebuilt with players who could pass block, provided protection. The receivers, like Dwight Clark, began to flourish in the precision route tree. The wins started to come, not consistently but noticeably. The team finished 6-10, a massive improvement. You could see it, a new fluency, a quiet confidence replacing the loud despair. The storm had passed, and in its wake, it left a perfectly calibrated foundation. The dysfunctional franchise had found its visionary. The visionary had found his perfect pupil. The pupil had found the system that turned his so-called weaknesses into legendary strengths. The stage was set not for a slow build, but for a meteoric ascent. All the elements, born of rejection, desperation, and serendipitous scouting, were now fused into a single entity. The Cincinnati blueprint, refined in exile, was now in the hands of its most eloquent teacher and its most gifted executor, playing in a city that had no idea it was about to become the epicenter of a football revolution. The perfect storm had not destroyed. It had cleared the ground for a dynasty to be built. The laboratory experiment was over. The show was about to begin. The relationship between Bill Walsh and Joe Montana is often portrayed as one of creator and creation, a genius architect designing a bespoke offense for his chosen quarterback. This is a compelling myth, but it reverses the true order of operations. The Alchemy was not Walsh building a new system for Montana. The system, in its essential philosophical and schematic DNA, already existed. It had been conceived in Cincinnati, nursed through exile, and codified at Stanford. What Walsh found in Montana was something far more rare, the perfect chemical catalyst for a pre-existing formula. Montana was the element that, when added to the compound, caused it not just to react, but to crystallize into its most perfect, brilliant form. Walsh didn't create the offense for Montana. He had spent over a decade creating the offense for which Montana was the predestined executor. Montana's unique and misunderstood skill set, his surgical accuracy, his supernatural poise, and his functional, subtle mobility were not the inspiration for the West Coast offense. They were the exact traits the system had always required to transition from a theory of efficiency to an instrument of domination. Consider the system's foundational demand, accuracy above all else. This was not a preference. It was the first commandment. The entire edifice was built on the assumption of completion. The short, timed passes, the rhythm throws, the extended handoffs. All of it collapsed if the ball was not delivered precisely to a spot on time, allowing the receiver to maintain his stride. A strong arm was irrelevant if it came with erratic placement. Montana's accuracy, especially on the move and under duress, was not merely good. It was the core of his football identity. Walsh recognized this instantly. Montana could deliver the 5-yard out route to the far sideline with the same touch and precision as a 20-yard dig over the middle. His throwing motion was compact and repeatable, a product of efficiency rather than power. This meant that the system's carefully designed plays, which relied on receivers breaking at specific depths and angles, would actually function as drawn. The timing was not theoretical. When Walsh installed a play where the receiver was to break outside at 7 yards, Montana's ball would be arriving at the 7-yard mark as the receiver's head turned back. This symbiotic precision turned schematic drawings into first downs. As Walsh himself later said, Joe had that great sense of timing. He knew when the receiver was going to come out of his break, and he could deliver the ball with a touch that was almost perfect. The system provided the roadmap. Montana provided the unerring sense of direction. Then there was the poise. The West Coast offense, for all its beauty, is mentally taxing. It requires the quarterback to make a series of rapid, pre-snap and post-snap decisions, often progressing through 3 or 4 receivers in less than 3 seconds. The pressure is cognitive as much as physical. It demands a mind that remains cool while chaos erupts. Montana's legendary calmness was not just a personality trait. It was the system's necessary psychological operating system. Defenses would blitz, coverage would tighten, plays would break down. The system had answers, hot reads, sight adjustments, safety valves. But those answers required a quarterback who would not panic, who would not abandon his progressions to force a hero ball throw downfield. Montana's heartbeat seemed to slow in critical moments. He had what his teammates called the look, a calm, almost detached focus. This allowed him to take the check down to the running back for a 2-yard gain on 3rd and 3 when the primary receivers were covered. It allowed him to throw the ball away rather than take a sack. He trusted that the system and the next play would provide another opportunity. This emotional discipline was the glue that held the system together under fire. It prevented the catastrophic mistakes that derail drives and lose games. Walsh's offense was designed to avoid turnovers. Montana's temperament guaranteed it. The third pillar was Montana's mobility, which is often misunderstood. He was not a scrambler in the style of a Fran Tarkenton, running to make plays with his legs. He was a mover, a slideshower, a pocket navigator. His mobility was functional, not flashy. The system required a quarterback who could execute a 5 or 7-step drop from the center, plant his back foot, and deliver. But NFL pockets are imperfect. They collapse, they shift, they deform. Montana's gift was his ability to feel that pressure, to take 2 subtle slides to his left or right, to reset his feet without his eyes ever leaving their downfield progression, and to still deliver that accurate timed throw. This ability extended the functional life of every play by a crucial half-second. It turned potential sacks into completions. It married the structure of the pocket passing system with the reality of NFL defensive lines. Walsh's offense often used moving pocket or bootleg concepts to get Montana on the edge, where his accuracy on the run could punish over-pursuing defenders. This was not an add-on for Montana. It was a core tenet of the Cincinnati-born system, which had always valued a quarterback's ability to throw accurately outside the tackle box. Montana's mobility wasn't a bonus feature. It was the feature that allowed the system to function in a non-laboratory, real-world environment. The true evidence of this alchemy lies in the fact that the system existed before Montana and succeeded after him. Walsh was running its principles with Virgil Carter in Cincinnati. He taught it at Stanford. And after Montana, it would flourish with Steve Young, a quarterback with a different but complementary skill set. Montana was not the reason for the system's existence. He was the proof of its universality. He was the living validation that if you took a quarterback with these specific traits, accuracy, poise, functional mobility, and placed him within this specific intellectual framework, the result would be historically great. Walsh often stated that the system was quarterback-proof in its design, meaning it could make efficient quarterbacks out of average talents. But with a quarterback who possessed those innate traits to a supreme degree, it could make legends. The magic, then, was in the fit. Montana did not have to contort himself to run Walsh's offense. He simply had to be more fully himself. The offense validated his strengths and rendered his supposed weaknesses irrelevant. His arm was good enough because the system never asked for more than good enough. It asked for exact. His slender frame was protected because the ball came out quickly and he knew how to avoid direct hits. In return, Montana gave the system its soul. He gave it a face, a demeanor, a clutch gene. He was the human element that transformed a brilliant coaching thesis into an epic poem. Together, they created an illusion of effortless success, as if the plays were unfolding in a predetermined, graceful rhythm. But that rhythm was the product of years of design meeting once-in-a-generation talent. The alchemy was complete. The formula conceived in the Midwest had found its ultimate reagent in a third-round draft pick, and the resulting reaction would change the landscape of professional football forever, all while casting a long shadow back to the quiet laboratory where it all began. The creation of a sports myth often follows a predictable pattern. A moment of triumph, a charismatic figure, and a narrative that simplifies complexity into a compelling, marketable story. But the naming of the West Coast offense stands as a unique case study in accidental historical revisionism. It was not a name born in a coach's meeting room or bestowed by its creators. It was a label applied from the outside by observers with a deadline and a need for a catchy shorthand. This label, born of geography and media convenience, would prove so sticky and so powerful that it would actively erase the true origin story, performing a quiet theft of legacy right before the eyes of the football world. The term West Coast offense was coined not in San Francisco, but in an office in New York, and its widespread adoption says less about the system itself and more about the media's need to frame innovation within a neat, geographically packaged narrative. The specific moment of christening can be traced to the 1979 season, Bill Walsh's first with the San Francisco 49ers. The team was struggling, as expected, but flashes of Walsh's unconventional approach were visible. On October 14, 1979, the 49ers lost to the Los Angeles Rams, but in covering the game, New York Times sportswriter John H. Branch needed a way to describe what he was seeing from Walsh's team. It was clearly a pass-heavy scheme, but unlike the Air Coryell vertical assault of Don Coryell's San Diego Chargers, it emphasized short, horizontal throws. In his article, Branch wrote, "The offense that Walsh brought with him from Stanford is known as the West Coast offense." It was a throwaway line, a descriptive phrase using the team's location as an identifier. There is no evidence that Walsh or anyone in his orbit had ever called it that. In Cincinnati, it had no name beyond Paul Brown's system. At Stanford, it was just Walsh's offense. But a journalist for America's paper of record had now given it a formal title, and that title was irrevocably tied to a region, not a person or a philosophy. The seed was planted. Why did this casually coined phrase take root and grow with such ferocious speed? The answer lies in a potent cocktail of media dynamics and cultural resonance. First, the San Francisco story was simply a better story. The narrative of a brilliant, cerebral coach resurrecting a moribund franchise on the picturesque West Coast with a stylish, newfangled passing game was catnip for sports writers and broadcasters. It had drama, a clear protagonist, and a vivid setting. The alternative narrative, that this was a refined version of a system invented a decade earlier by the already legendary Paul Brown in unglamorous Cincinnati, lacked the same fairy tale quality. It was a story of evolution, not revolution, of refinement, not invention. The media, consciously or not, gravitates toward the cleaner, more dramatic origin point. Second, the name provided a perfect contrast to the dominant offensive identity of the era, which was embodied by the NFC Central and Eastern teams. The bruising, run-oriented attacks of Chicago, Washington, and New York. Calling it the West Coast offense implicitly contrasted it with East Coast or Midwestern football, framing it as a finesse alternative to a power game. This geographical branding made it easy to understand and discuss. It became a cultural signifier as much as a football term. The third factor was the sheer velocity of the 49ers' success. By 1981, they were champions. The system was not just interesting, it was proven. As the trophies accumulated, the need for a name for this winning philosophy became journalistic necessity. West Coast offense was already in the ecosystem. It was succinct, evocative, and geographically logical for the team employing it. It stuck. Every broadcast mention, every newspaper column, every magazine feature reinforced the name. Soon, it was not just a West Coast offense. It was the West Coast offense, trademarked by success. Bill Walsh pragmatically did not fight the tide. He may have privately known its origins, but publicly, the name served him. It branded him as an innovator, a visionary from the left coast who had changed the game. To constantly correct the record and say, actually, this started with Paul Brown in Cincinnati, would have been an awkward and perhaps ungrateful digression from the story of his own burgeoning dynasty. The media's love affair with the San Francisco story, combined with Walsh's tacit acceptance, created a feedback loop that amplified the new name and drowned out the old history. For Cincinnati and for Paul Brown, this represented a rapid and profound erasure. The system that had been his pragmatic brainchild, the one that had made Virgil Carter the league's most accurate passer, was now being celebrated thousands of miles away under a different name. Brown's Bengals were running the same core system. They would even implement it to reach a Super Bowl after the 1981 season, but no one called it the Cincinnati offense or the Ohio Valley offense. They were seen as adherents to or imitators of the West Coast style. The true lineage was reversed. It was as if the world decided that because a student had painted a magnificent masterpiece using his teacher's techniques and colors, the technique itself must have originated with the student. The media, in its role as the curator of sports history, had effectively relocated the innovation. Cincinnati became a footnote, a place where Walsh had learned under Brown, with the implication that the true magic was Walsh's alone. The gritty, practical Midwestern birthplace of the system was scrubbed clean from the popular imagination, replaced by the sun-drenched, triumphant imagery of San Francisco. This theft by nomenclature was not malicious, but it was structurally complete. It demonstrates how historical memory is often shaped not by where something began, but by where it first became spectacularly successful. The name West Coast Offense is a monument to the power of narrative over fact, of destination over journey. It provided a perfect container for a football revolution, but in doing so, it sealed away the true story of its conception. The system traveled from Cincinnati to San Francisco in the mind of Bill Walsh, and upon arrival, it was given a new passport, one that listed its place of birth incorrectly. The media, as the issuing authority, never looked back. And so, the greatest misnomer in football was cemented, not by a coach's proclamation, but by a journalist's convenient phrase, setting the stage for a historical confusion that would last for decades, obscuring the pragmatic heart of the system beneath the glittering veneer of its coastal name. The most compelling evidence in this story isn't found in quotes or biographies, but in the silent, flickering frames of game film. To understand the true lineage of the West Coast offense, you must look past the names and the geography and simply watch. When you place the game film from the 1970 to 1975 Cincinnati Bengals side by side with the film from the early 1980s San Francisco 49ers, a stunning reality emerges. This isn't a case of similar philosophies or vague influence. It is a direct schematic transfusion. The route trees are identical. The protection schemes are mirror images. The quarterback's footwork and progression reads are cloned. The DNA is undeniable. This is not Walsh inventing something new in San Francisco. This is Walsh perfecting and executing the systemic language he learned in Cincinnati, with better players and greater authority. The film is the unassailable truth, a cold case solved by forensic analysis of the game itself. Let's start with the foundational route concepts. The core of the offense, in both cities, was the sail or triangle concept, designed to attack one side of the field with a high-low read. For the Bengals, this often meant tight end Bob Trumpy running a corner route at 12 to 15 yards, a wide receiver like Chip Myers running an intermediate out at 10 to 12 yards, and the running back flaring to the flat. The quarterback's read was simple. Safety deep, throw the corner. Linebacker squatting, throw the out. Linebacker chasing the back, dump it to the flat. Now watch the 49ers in 1981. The exact same concept. Dwight Clark or Freddie Solomon on the corner, the other receiver on the out, and Earl Cooper or Bill Ring in the flat. Joe Montana's eyes moved through the same progression. The geometry was precisely replicated. Another staple was the shallow cross series, where a receiver, often from the backside, would drag across the field at a depth of 4 to 6 yards, creating a moving target against zone coverage and a rub against man. Virgil Carter threw this pass repeatedly to Isaac Curtis or Trumpy. Montana threw it to Clark, Solomon, or Mike Wilson. The play was not just similar. It was the same play called by the same number in the playbook, taught with the same verbal cues. The protection schemes tell an even more technical story. Both systems relied heavily on scat or jersey protection, a scheme where the offensive line blocks every defender except one specific, designated player, often a linebacker, who becomes the sole responsibility of the running back. This allowed for a clean five-man pocket for the quarterback to make his quick rhythm throws. The identification of the free defender and the communication between the center and the back were drilled with identical precision in Cincinnati and San Francisco. Furthermore, the use of the half-slide protection, where the line slides one direction while the back picks up the most dangerous blitzer from the other side, is evident in both film reels. The quarterback's drop, whether a quick 3-step or a deeper 5-step, was synchronized with these protections. Carter's quick, almost jittery steps in Cincinnati mirror the calm, measured retreat of Montana in San Francisco. The timing was system-based, not quarterback-based. The machinery functioned the same way, regardless of the operator. Consider specific, telltale plays. The 49ers' most famous play, sprint right option, the play that resulted in the catch by Dwight Clark to win the 1981 NFC Championship, is the ultimate example of buried lineage. This was not a new play drawn up for Montana. It was a core play in the Cincinnati playbook, known then as 84Z delay. The design: the offensive line and running back fake a run to the left, the quarterback rolls right, and the primary receiver, the Z, runs a delayed corner route into the end zone. Virgil Carter ran this play for the Bengals. In fact, in a 1975 game against the Houston Oilers, Carter hit Isaac Curtis on the exact same route for a touchdown. The footage is eerily similar: the fake, the roll, the throw to the back corner. The only difference is that Clark made a more acrobatic catch, and it happened on a national stage with a Super Bowl berth on the line. The play that defines the 49ers dynasty was a Cincinnati heirloom. The quarterback's role and mechanics further cement the connection. The system demanded a quarterback who played with rhythm and anticipation, not raw power. Watch Carter in 1971. He takes the snap, his drop is brisk and measured, his head swivels through his progression from deep to short, and he delivers the ball with a quick release, often before the receiver has fully turned. Now watch Montana in 1983. The same economical drop, the same sequenced head turn, the same quick release. They are performing the same choreography. The system dictated the footwork: a hitch after the fifth step to buy an extra half second, a rocker step to transition weight from the back foot to the front foot on the throw. These were not natural tendencies. They were coach techniques, drilled into both men by the same coaching philosophy. The reads against zone coverage, looking off the safety, holding the middle linebacker with your eyes, are executed with the same deliberate patience. The film shows two quarterbacks, a decade apart, operating the same software. Even the audibles and checks at the line of scrimmage bear the marks of a common origin. Paul Brown was a pioneer of sending in plays with guards, and he emphasized a controlled, no-huddle approach at times to prevent defensive substitutions. Walsh employed the same tactic, famously using a sugar huddle to control tempo. The concept of check with me plays, where the quarterback comes to the line with two play calls and chooses one based on the defensive alignment, was a staple in Cincinnati before it became a trademark of Montana's pre-snap prowess in San Francisco. The intellectual framework, the belief that the offense could and should dictate to the defense before the snap, was pure Paul Brown, executed by his disciple. The side-by-side analysis leaves no room for debate. The offensive system that propelled the San Francisco 49ers to dynastic glory was not invented in the Bay Area. It was unpacked there. The crates contained schematics drawn in Ohio, practice drills honed at the Bengals training facility, and a philosophical manifesto written in the mind of Paul Brown and edited by Bill Walsh. The film is the courtroom exhibit that proves the case. The route trees are the family trees. The protection schemes are the shared syntax. When you mute the commentary and ignore the jersey colors, you see one continuous offense, evolving in its execution but unchanging in its core principles. The proof is in the film, and the film tells a truth that the name West Coast offense has worked for decades to conceal. This was, and always will be, a system with its heart in the Midwest, a fact etched in the grainy, undeniable footage of a football revolution that was merely waiting for its right time and place to be celebrated, and ultimately misnamed. To understand the depth of the historical injustice, you must understand the man. Paul Brown was not just a football coach. He was a founding father of the modern game, a man whose innovations, from the playbook to the face mask to the practice squad, were so fundamental they became invisible like oxygen. He was a stoic, proud, and fiercely intellectual figure who believed in systems, in control, in the power of organization to overcome chaos. His dismissal from Cleveland in 1963 was a scar that never fully healed, and the Cincinnati Bengals were to be his vindication, his proof that his methods were timeless. Within this project, he nurtured Bill Walsh. He shared his philosophies, his strategies, his very approach to the game. And then, he watched as the pupil took their shared creation to the Pacific and became celebrated as its sole inventor, while he, the progenitor, was relegated to a mention in the footnotes. The story of Paul Brown's silent fury is not one of public outbursts or bitter feuds. It is a story of a proud man swallowing a profound historical slight, his frustration simmering beneath a surface of dignified, Midwestern reserve. Publicly, Brown was always the gracious mentor. When asked about Walsh and the 49ers' success, he would offer measured praise. He would acknowledge Walsh's brilliant teaching ability, his offensive mind, his success. He never launched into a public campaign to reclaim credit. To do so would have been beneath him, a violation of his own code of conduct. It would have seemed petty, envious. Brown's pride dictated that he could not be seen as chasing the accolades of a former assistant. He had his own team to run, his own legacy to solidify in Cincinnati. So, in interviews, he became the proud teacher, a role that allowed him some share in the reflected glory without having to beg for it. He could say, "I'm not surprised Bill has done so well," and let the implication of his own tutelage hang in the air. But this public facade was a carefully maintained dam, holding back a torrent of private resentment. Privately, according to those close to him, the bitterness was palpable. The naming of the West Coast offense was the ultimate insult. It wasn't just that Walsh was getting credit. It was that the credit was geographically alienating. Cut Brown's Cincinnati out of the story completely. He saw the media anoint Walsh a genius for implementing a system whose foundational principles, the short passing game, the emphasis on completion percentage, the rhythmic quarterback play, were his own directives. He had once dismissed one of Walsh's cleverer pass concepts as a sissy play, a moment that perfectly encapsulated their philosophical friction. Brown valued tough, systematic efficiency. Walsh valued artistic, psychological finesse. Now, the sissy philosophy born from his own laboratory was being crowned as the future of football, and he was being cast as the outdated relic. The irony was corrosive. Friends and family reported Brown would watch 49ers games, see a familiar play, and mutter in frustration, knowing its origin. He felt history being rewritten in real time, and he was powerless to stop it. This silent fury, however, did not manifest as surrender. Instead, it fueled a quiet, determined parallel effort. While Walsh was winning Super Bowls in San Francisco, Brown was proving the system's efficacy in its birthplace. Under his guidance and with his direct input, the Cincinnati Bengals evolved their own version of the offense. With quarterback Ken Anderson, a player of remarkable accuracy and intelligence, Brown and his coaches refined the system. They incorporated more of the timing-based routes, the sprint-out passes, the layered reads that Walsh was using. The result was not an imitation. It was a sibling's evolution. In the very 1981 season that culminated in the catch and the 49ers' first championship, the Cincinnati Bengals, led by Paul Brown's system and Ken Anderson's MVP-level execution, marched to the Super Bowl themselves. The narrative should have been irresistible. Teacher and pupil, originator and propagator, meeting on the sport's biggest stage, both using the same core offensive philosophy. But the narrative that took hold was Cinderella 49ers versus the Bengals. The name West Coast Offense was not applied to Cincinnati's attack. They were just a good team with a good quarterback. The geographical branding had permanently annexed the system. Brown's continued evolution of the scheme in Cincinnati is a testament to his enduring genius and a silent rebuttal to his erasure. Ken Anderson's 1981 season was a masterpiece of efficiency that directly mirrored, and in some statistical categories surpassed, what Montana was doing. Anderson completed a then-record 70.6% of his passes, a number that defied belief and was a direct product of the system's design. Brown was demonstrating that the offense was not dependent on Walsh's touch or Montana's magic. It was a replicable formula for success. He was proving his own point on the field, even if no one was using his name to describe it. Every Bengals touchdown pass on a shallow cross, every first down on a quick out, was a quiet, unheralded affirmation of his original vision. He was shouting into a hurricane of West Coast hype, his contributions lost in the gale. The final, poignant layer of this silent fury was the personal wound beneath the professional one. Brown had seen Walsh as part of his football family, a brilliant son of sorts. The passover for the head coaching job was, in Brown's mind, a tough but necessary football decision. He likely never anticipated it would lead to this total severing of the idea from its source. There was a sense of betrayal that mingled with the professional jealousy. He had given Walsh his philosophy, his trust, and in return, he felt his legacy was being cannibalized. Yet, he could never express this fully. To do so would be to admit a vulnerability, a need for recognition that his stern, authoritative persona could not accommodate. So he internalized it. He let it fuel his work in Cincinnati. He watched the trophies go to San Francisco and the plaudits go to Walsh, while he maintained the stiff upper lip of the patriarch, even as history was slipping through his fingers. Paul Brown's silent fury is the emotional core of this story of misattribution. It represents the cost of the rewritten narrative. While the world celebrated the bright, shiny object on the coast, the man who forged it in the industrial heartland stood in the shadows, knowing the truth, possessing the proof, but condemned by the overwhelming power of a better story to be a footnote in his own creation. His continued success with the Bengals was his only available rebuttal, a stubborn, brilliant insistence that the system worked here, too, where it was born. It was a fury that never raised its voice, but echoed in every precise play call, every practiced repetition, every quiet moment of watching his football child succeed under another name. The true legacy of this offensive system is not found on a map, but in a genealogy. It is not a story of a place, but of people, of teachers and students, of intellectual inheritance passed down like a sacred text. The West Coast offense, as a viral football philosophy, did not spread across the NFL from the California coast. That is a geographic illusion. It spread from the minds of coaches who were taught by Bill Walsh, who was taught by Paul Brown. The real legacy is the coaching tree, a sprawling oak whose roots are sunk deep in Ohio soil, whose trunk was shaped in the Cincinnati and San Francisco film rooms, and whose branches now shade the entire league. This diaspora of assistants, Mike Holmgren, Mike Shanahan, George Seifert, Dennis Green, Bruce Coslett, Sam Walsh, and countless others, represents the system's ultimate victory and the final, ironic proof of its misnamed origins. Their collective success is not a testament to the power of the West Coast. It is a testament to the power of a teaching lineage that began with the most systematic teacher of them all. To understand the coaching tree, you must first understand what Walsh was teaching. He was not merely installing a playbook. He was instilling a comprehensive football worldview. This worldview had two parents. From Paul Brown, it inherited the core belief in system over individual, in the meticulous organization of practice, in the removal of randomness through preparation, and in the strategic primacy of ball control and high percentage plays. From Walsh's own genius, it gained the layers of psychological nuance, the detailed focus on quarterback mechanics and receiver precision, and the eloquent language for teaching complex concepts. When Walsh trained his assistants in San Francisco, he was passing on this hybrid philosophy. He was teaching them how to teach. He was showing them how to build a standard of performance, how to conduct a film session that revealed truths, and how to design a practice that reinforced rhythm and timing. His assistants weren't just learning plays, they were learning a method. And that method was directly descended from the one Paul Brown used on a young Bill Walsh in Cincinnati. Look at the progeny. Mike Holmgren, the quarterback's coach under Walsh, absorbed the intricacies of tutoring the position directly from the master. When he became head coach in Green Bay, he did not simply photocopy the 49ers playbook. He installed the system, the teaching methods, the practice tempo, the offensive philosophy. And with it, he turned Brett Favre, a cannon-armed risk-taker from a Southern College air raid offense, into a three-time MVP and a Super Bowl champion. The process was classic Walsh through Brown. Simplify the reads, emphasize timing and accuracy on short and intermediate routes, build the offense around quick decisions and manageable throws. Holmgren's success in Green Bay and later Seattle was a branch of the tree bearing fruit far from California, proving the system's portability. Then there is Mike Shanahan. He learned under Walsh as an offensive coordinator, mastering the intricate run-pass integrations and the play-action game that would become his hallmark. When he took over in Denver, he fused the Walsh passing concepts with a devastating outside zone running game, creating an offensive juggernaut that won 2 Super Bowls. His quarterback, John Elway, was another strong-armed veteran whose game was refined and focused by the system's discipline in his twilight years. Shanahan's coaching tree itself, which includes offensive minds like Gary Kubiak and Sean McVay, extends the lineage further, but the core principles of timing, precision, and teaching remain traceable back to those Cincinnati and San Francisco meeting rooms. Shanahan's brilliance was in evolution, but the genome was inherited. George Seifert, the defensive coordinator who succeeded Walsh as head coach of the 49ers, is perhaps the most poignant example of the system's embedded nature. He was not an offensive specialist, but he was a product of the culture. He understood the standard of performance intimately. When he took the reins, he maintained the offensive system perfectly, steering it to 2 more championships. This demonstrated that the system was now institutional, bigger than any one person. It was a self-sustaining machine, a testament to the depth of the coaching infrastructure Walsh had built, an infrastructure modeled on the systematic organization he learned from Paul Brown. The tree extends in all directions. Dennis Green, another Walsh assistant, took the offensive principles to Minnesota, where they fueled one of the most explosive attacks of the 1990s with Chris Carter and Randy Moss, adapting the short passing timing to deeper threats. Sam Walsh, a quarterback under Brown and an assistant under Walsh, implemented his own creative version in Cincinnati and Tampa Bay. Bruce Coslett, Ray Sherman, and others spread the gospel. Even coaches who never worked directly for Walsh, like Andy Reid, learned from Holmgren, creating a second generation of disciples. Reid's offenses, from Philadelphia to Kansas City, with their prolific short to intermediate passing games and quarterback-friendly designs, are direct descendants of this lineage. This sprawling coaching tree is the real legacy, and it dismantles the geographic myth completely. The system did not radiate out from San Francisco because of some Californian magic. It spread because men who learned a specific teachable methodology from Bill Walsh became head coaches and taught it themselves. And the methodology they learned was, in its foundational layer, the methodology of Paul Brown. The intellectual lineage is clear. Brown's systematics to Walsh's teaching artistry to the diaspora of coaches who blended both into their own identities. The West Coast offense is a label attached to a branch of this tree, but the roots and the trunk belong to a coaching philosophy born of two men in the Midwest. Therefore, when we see the echoes of this offense in every modern NFL game, in the quick game concepts, the packaged plays, the emphasis on quarterback completion percentage, we are not seeing the influence of a region. We are witnessing the triumph of a pedagogical dynasty. The real legacy is not that the offense came from the West Coast. The real legacy is that the best way to teach offense, to build a quarterback, and to win consistently was developed and refined through a chain of brilliant teachers that started with a stoic visionary in Ohio and was propagated by his most eloquent student. The name on the system is wrong, but its victory is absolute because it was never about a coast. It was always about a classroom. The most persuasive argument for any football system is its product. And the product of the offensive philosophy born in Cincinnati and branded in San Francisco was, consistently and undeniably, quarterbacks. It functioned not merely as an offense, but as a quarterback factory, an assembly line that took raw or flawed talent and refined it into efficient, prolific, and often championship-winning performance. This was not an accident. It was the system's primary design feature. In an era dominated by contrasting philosophies that often asked the quarterback to be a heroic gambler, this system asked him to be a disciplined manager. It elevated quarterbacks by performing two fundamental acts. It simplified their mental reads to a binary checklist, and it protected their physical selves through scheme and quick release. The proof is in the careers it resurrected, polished, and immortalized, a stark contrast to the volatile, high-risk approaches that defined much of the contemporary offensive landscape. First, the simplification. The prevailing offensive ideologies of the late 1970s and early 1980s, most famously the Air Coryell system in San Diego, were built on verticality and option routes. They asked receivers to read the coverage on the fly and adjust their routes, which in turn demanded the quarterback to read the same complex coverage picture and anticipate where his receiver would decide to go. It was a thing of breathtaking beauty when it worked, but it required psychic chemistry and often resulted in catastrophic miscommunications or forced throws into coverage. It was a burn-the-barn philosophy. Go for the explosive play, accept the inherent risks. The Cincinnati-San Francisco system was the antithesis. It was about controlled demolition. Receivers ran precise, timed routes. The quarterback's reads were structured as progressions, often from deep to short, or from one side of the field to the other. The most persuasive argument for any football system is its product. And the product of the offensive philosophy born in Cincinnati and branded in San Francisco was, consistently and undeniably, quarterbacks. It functioned not merely as an offense, but as a quarterback factory, an assembly line that took raw or flawed talent and refined it into efficient, prolific, and often championship-winning performance. This was not an accident. It was the system's primary design feature. In an era dominated by contrasting philosophies that often asked the quarterback to be a heroic gambler, this system asked him to be a disciplined manager. It elevated quarterbacks by performing two fundamental acts. It simplified their mental reads to a binary checklist, and it protected their physical selves through scheme and quick release. The proof is in the careers it resurrected, polished, and immortalized, a stark contrast to the volatile, high-risk approaches that defined much of the contemporary offensive landscape. First, the simplification. The prevailing offensive ideologies of the late 1970s and early 1980s, most famously the Air Coryell system in San Diego, were built on verticality and option routes. They asked receivers to read the coverage on the fly and adjust their routes, which in turn demanded the quarterback to read the same complex coverage picture and anticipate where his receiver would decide to go. It was a thing of breathtaking beauty when it worked, but it required psychic chemistry and often resulted in catastrophic miscommunications or forced throws into coverage. It was a burn-the-barn philosophy. Go for the explosive play, accept the inherent risks. The Cincinnati-San Francisco system was the antithesis. It was about controlled demolition. Receivers ran precise, timed routes. The quarterback's reads were structured as progressions, often from deep to short, or from one side of the field to the other. The system removed the guesswork. It told the quarterback, asterisk, your first read is here. If he is covered, your second read is there. If he is covered, your third read is here. Asterisk, the field was divided into manageable segments. Joe Montana's legendary calm was, in part, a product of this clarity. He wasn't scanning chaos. He was following a prepared checklist with the confidence that one of the options would be available. This allowed quarterbacks with high football IQs but perhaps less arm talent, like a Matt Hasselbeck in Seattle years later, to thrive. They could process the checklist quickly and accurately. Second, the protection. The system was a quarterback's sanctuary. It protected him physically through its emphasis on a quick passing game. The ball was designed to come out in 2.5 to 3 seconds. This negated pass rushes, reducing sacks and the brutal punishment that shortened careers. It protected him statistically and psychologically by valuing completions and avoiding turnovers. The check down to the running back was not a failure. It was a designed, successful play that kept the offense on schedule. This built a quarterback's confidence. He wasn't asked to carry the offense with his arm on every play. He was asked to distribute the ball to the open man, a much less daunting task. Look at Steve Young's career arc. Before joining the 49ers, he was a phenomenal athlete with a great arm, but he was a reckless, turnover-prone player in Tampa Bay, running for his life behind bad teams and trying to force plays. Inserted into the system in San Francisco, he was physically protected by its design and mentally calmed by its structure. The result was 2 MVP awards and a Super Bowl MVP. His athleticism now a devastating complement to the system's precision, not a replacement for it. The most dramatic case study is Brett Favre. When Mike Holmgren, a Walsh disciple, traded for Favre in Green Bay, he acquired a human cannon with a propensity for breathtakingly reckless play. Favre's early career in Atlanta was defined by interceptions and chaos. Holmgren and the West Coast system tamed him. They didn't remove his gunslinger mentality, that was impossible, but they channeled it. They gave him the simplified reads, 1, 2, 3, check down. They drilled the importance of the safe, high-percentage throw. The system provided Favre with a baseline of efficiency that his talent could then elevate. He won 3 consecutive MVPs and a Super Bowl because the system provided structure, and his unparalleled arm talent provided the explosive plays within that structure. He was the perfect hybrid, the system's discipline married to generational physical gifts. Contrast this with the fates of many pure, burn-the-barn quarterbacks of the same period. The history of the NFL is littered with strong-armed passers whose careers flamed out early due to physical punishment, inconsistency, and interception problems. They were asked to do too much, to win games solely with their arm, often behind poor protection. The system developed by Brown and Walsh offered a sustainable alternative. It was a career extender, a success maximizer. It turned Ken Anderson, a third-round pick, into an MVP. It turned Montana, a third-round pick doubted for his arm, into a legend. It turned the journeyman Hasselbeck into a Pro Bowler and Super Bowl quarterback. It turned the raw, chaotic talents of Young and Favre into polished, championship-winning machines. The system was never meant to be a museum piece. Its genius, inherited from Paul Brown's relentless pragmatism, was its inherent adaptability. It was a philosophy of efficiency, and if a new tool could enhance that efficiency, it would be absorbed. This is where the story moves from Bill Walsh's San Francisco to Mike Shanahan's Denver, and in doing so, completes the system's journey from a revolutionary passing scheme to a holistic, unstoppable offensive ideology. Shanahan, the most prolific evolutionary biologist of the coaching tree, performed the critical synthesis. He took the Cincinnati-born passing principles and fused them with a devastating physical zone-running attack. In doing so, he created the most balanced defensive machine of its era, yet he never altered the foundational passing DNA. The offense mutated in form, but its core genetic code, the timing, the reads, the quarterback-centric design, remained pure, undiluted Cincinnati. Shanahan's education was comprehensive. He learned the Walsh system as an offensive coordinator for the 49ers during their dynasty years, witnessing its inner workings at their peak. He understood the passing game's architecture down to the last stud. But Shanahan was also a student of football history, and he saw a potential limitation. The Walsh 49ers, for all their precision, could at times become one-dimensional in the run game, relying on draws and delays that complemented the pass but didn't necessarily dominate a defense physically. Shanahan envisioned a more potent union. He looked to the past, to the foundational running schemes of coaches like Sid Gilman, and to the present, to the techniques being refined by offensive line coach Alex Gibbs. The result was the incorporation of the outside zone, or stretch, running play as the system's engine. This was not merely adding a new play, it was integrating a new language. The zone running game is a philosophy unto itself. It asks offensive linemen to step laterally in unison, working in tandem to reach and overtake defenders, creating horizontal seams for the running back. The back's job is to press the line of scrimmage, read the blocks, and cut decisively upfield. Its beauty is in its constraint-shattering effect on a defense. It forces defensive ends and linebackers to commit laterally, to respect the genuine threat of a sustained ground attack. And that is where Shanahan's alchemy occurred. By marrying the outside zone with the West Coast passing game, he made each infinitely more powerful. The play-action pass became a weapon of mass destruction. When a defense had to honor Terrell Davis's lethal cutbacks, the linebackers and safeties would freeze for a fatal half-second on play-action. This created gigantic voids in the intermediate passing zones, the very zones where the Cincinnati system's route combinations were designed to operate. The Denver Broncos of the late 1990s were the definitive proof of concept. The passing game was classic Walsh, born of Brown. 3- and 5-step drops, quick slants, shallow crosses, sprint-out passes, and the ever-present check-down. John Elway, the archetypal strong-armed gunslinger, was finally given a system that protected him, simplified his reads, and leveraged his athleticism on bootlegs and waggles. But now, every play-action fake was sold with the terrifying credibility of the zone run. Elway's play-action touchdown pass to Rod Smith in Super Bowl 32 is a perfect fossil of this evolution. The run action sucked the linebackers toward the line, and Smith ran a deep post from the slot into a cavernous open field. It was a deep shot, yes, but it was set up by the systemic threat of the run, a threat baked into every snap. The core passing play itself, a deep post-off play-action, wasn't new, but its efficacy was multiplied 100-fold by the terrifying efficiency of the running game it now lived beside. Yet, for all the new musculature, the nervous system remained unchanged. The quarterback's footwork on a play-action bootleg was the same rhythmic, timed movement Walsh taught, derived from the need for quick, accurate releases from Cincinnati. The receiver's route depths and break points were identical. The protection schemes, even with the added complexity of zone-blocking play-action, were built on the same principles of identifying the free defender. Shanahan didn't rewrite the passing playbook. He simply wrote a more compelling introduction to it in the form of the run game. He understood that the Brown-Walsh system's ultimate goal was to make the quarterback's job easy and efficient. What could be more efficient than freezing linebackers with a running game they genuinely feared? This evolution made the offense truly universal. It was no longer a finesse system that could be bullied in bad weather or by physical defenses. Now it had a hammer to go with its scalpel. Shanahan's success in Denver, and the subsequent success of his disciples like Gary Kubiak and Mike's son, Kyle, proved that the system could morph to fit any personnel. It could be a pass-first marvel in San Francisco with Montana, a balanced powerhouse in Denver with Elway and Davis, and later a versatile tool in Houston, Washington, and beyond. Each iteration, however, pointed back to the source. When Kyle Shanahan calls a play in San Francisco today, the route combination is often a direct descendant of a 1970s Bengals play, and the outside zone run it's paired with is the legacy of his father's synthesis. The systemic evolution from Walsh to Shanahan is the final, elegant argument against the geographic name. It demonstrates that the West Coast label was always a misnomer for a philosophy, not a playbook. A philosophy born of pragmatic problem-solving in Cincinnati could incorporate a running scheme from anywhere and succeed in the Rocky Mountains. The location was irrelevant. The ideas were transportable and adaptable. Shanahan's masterpiece in Denver was the ultimate flourish on a thesis written in Ohio. He gave the system a new body, a more powerful physique, but the brain, the soul, the essential commandments of how to pass the football remained the unwavering legacy of Paul Brown's original design. The offense had evolved beyond its name, becoming something its own creators might not have initially recognized. Yet its beating heart still timed its rhythm to the old, pragmatic clock of the Midwest. The league-wide average completion percentage has soared from the low 50s in 1970 to consistently over 64% today. This isn't just because quarterbacks are more accurate. It's because the entire offensive philosophy of the league has been bent toward creating easier, quicker, more certain completions. This was the central, revolutionary math of the Cincinnati system, and the entire sport now solves its problems with that equation. Then consider the route concepts, the sophisticated option routes that Bill Walsh refined, where a receiver reads the leverage of a defender and breaks inside or outside accordingly, were once a novel, complex language. Today, they are the default setting for every passing attack. The slant-flat combination, the levels concept, the stick route, all are direct descendants of the Bengals and 49ers playbooks. Modern offensive minds have added layers of pre-snap motion and run-pass options, RPOs. But the underlying goal is the same, to create a numbers advantage or a leverage advantage in a specific area of the field, and to give the quarterback a clear, simple read. The progression reads high to low, outside in, that were drilled into Virgil Carter and Joe Montana are now taught to every rookie quarterback from their first day in the league. The system's greatest triumph is that its complexity became so successful it had to be copied, and in being copied universally, it became the new simplicity. The role of the running back in the passing game is another telltale fossil. Before this system, running backs were primarily check-down options, safety valves in times of trouble. In the Brown-Walsh scheme, the back became a primary passing weapon, a designed receiver on swing routes, angle routes, and screens from the very inception of the play. This was a strategic reimagining of the position. Look at the NFL today. The most valuable running backs are no longer just bell cow rushers. They are dual-threat weapons who must be lethal as receivers out of the backfield. This is not a coincidence. It is a direct result of the system proving that a back who can catch is more valuable than a back who can only run. The system turned a position of power into a position of finesse and versatility, and the league followed. Even the modern emphasis on pace and tempo finds its roots in the system's intellectual forebears. Paul Brown was a pioneer of the no-huddle, not to create a frenetic blur, but to exert control, to prevent defensive substitutions, and to force a defense into a passive, reactive posture. Today's hurry-up offenses, while more extreme, operate on the same principle: dictate to the defense. It is another form of the psychological warfare Walsh so loved. By controlling the tempo, the offense seizes the initiative, simplifying the game for its own quarterback while complicating it for the opposing defense. The desire to control the terms of engagement, a hallmark of the Cincinnati mindset, is now a standard tactical weapon in every coach's arsenal. This pervasiveness is the final, ironic triumph. The system was so effective that it ceased to be a distinctive style and became the baseline. There are no more pure West Coast offenses because every offense is, in some significant way, a descendant. The air raid concepts popular in college football, with their spread formations and quick game focus, are philosophical cousins. The Earhart-Perkins system, known for its concise terminology, shares the core belief in simplification and quarterback-friendly design. The modern play caller, whether he knows it or not, is speaking a dialect of the language first formally structured by Paul Brown and given eloquent voice by Bill Walsh. Therefore, the ultimate legacy of the misnamed West Coast offense is its own vanishing act. It won so completely that it disappeared into the foundations of the sport. The ideas forged in the pragmatic fires of Cincinnati, that football could be systematized, that risk could be managed, that the quarterback could be protected and elevated through design, are now the non-negotiable prerequisites for any successful offensive operation. The geographical error in its name is now a historical curiosity, because the philosophy itself has no geography. It is everywhere. It is in the call sheet of every coordinator, in the muscle memory of every quarterback taking a three-step drop, in the design of every play that values possession over explosion. Brown and Walsh didn't just create an offense, they helped create the modern offensive mind. And in doing so, they achieved the most profound victory possible. Their revolution became the establishment. Their signature became the standard handwriting of the league. To watch an NFL game today is to witness a ghost in the machine. The plays are faster, the athletes are larger, the formations are more wide open. But if you listen closely to the rhythm of the game, you can hear the steady, persistent echo of a playbook drawn up in Cincinnati over 50 years ago. The offensive system born of Paul Brown's pragmatism and refined by Bill Walsh's artistry did not just win championships. It achieved something far more permanent. It became the league's universal language. Its core tenets have been so thoroughly absorbed, adapted, and disseminated that they are now the unconscious grammar of modern professional football. The short, timed throws, the option routes that manipulate defenders, the sacrosanct emphasis on quarterback completion percentage, the use of the pass as an extension of the run, these are not innovations anymore. They are assumptions. They are the atmosphere every offense breathes. This is the ultimate quiet victory of Brown and Walsh's ideas. Their system transcended its name and its origin to become the very foundation upon which all modern offensive football is built. Start with the most visible tenet, the obsession with completion percentage. In the pre-Cincinnati system era, completion percentage was a statistic, often a reflection of a quarterback's accuracy or a team's conservative nature. After the system's triumph, it became a strategic weapon. Paul Brown's original insight that a completion is the most efficient play in football, a guaranteed positive gain that avoids the risks of the run or the sack, is now dogma. Today, every offensive coordinator, from the most conservative to the most aggressive, designs plays to create high-percentage throws. The layup pass, the quick screen, the check down, the shallow cross, these are the building blocks of every modern drive. Analysts speak of a quarterback's completion percentage above expectation as a key metric. The Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, stands as the ultimate arbiter of legacy, a marble and bronze pantheon where the game's gods are eternally enshrined. Within its halls, both Paul Brown and Bill Walsh have their busts. They are forever celebrated, forever immortalized for their transformative contributions to the sport. This shared enshrinement suggests a final, equitable justice, a recognition that both master and pupil were essential to one of football's greatest evolutions. Yet, the polished silence of Canton cannot quiet the noisy narrative of history played outside its walls. Here lies the profound irony. While the institution properly honors both men, the popular memory, shaped by a simple geographical label, continues to bind the offense irrevocably to Walsh and the West Coast. This misnomer acts as a subtle but powerful filter, amplifying one legacy while quietly, persistently diminishing the other. It is a case study in how fame works, in how a name can shape memory long after the facts have been formally recorded. Walk through the hall. Paul Brown's plaque rightly cites him as an innovative coach and founder who revolutionized football with endless contributions. It mentions his coaching trees and his influence. Bill Walsh's plaque celebrates him as the architect of the West Coast offense and a three-time Super Bowl champion. The institutional language is careful, but already the framing is set. Walsh is named as the architect of the thing called the West Coast offense. Brown is the revolutionary, but his specific connection to that offense is implicit, woven into the broader tapestry of his innovations. For the casual fan on a pilgrimage, the takeaway is often cemented. Walsh built this beautiful offensive machine. Brown was a great foundational figure from an earlier time. The proximity of their busts does not automatically convey the direct lineage of ideas. The Hall of Fame, for all its majesty, freezes men in moments. It cannot force the viewer to trace the connective thread between them. So, the pre-existing narrative, the one formed by media and championships, fills the void. The name West Coast Offense is a branding iron applied to Walsh's legacy, making it instantly recognizable and marketable. Brown's legacy, by contrast, is more diffuse, a collection of foundational innovations, the face mask, the practice squad, the playbook, of which the offensive system is just one part. The name allows Walsh to own a singular, glorious thing. Brown is left owning the infrastructure of the entire modern game, a monumental achievement, but one less easily packaged and celebrated. This amplification and diminution play out in the culture every day. When a television analyst draws up a West Coast concept on the telestrator, he credits Bill Walsh. He might say, "This is classic Walsh," or "This comes from the West Coast system." He almost never begins with, "This principle was first implemented by Paul Brown in Cincinnati." The name shortcuts directly to San Francisco. Walsh's legacy is thus constantly refreshed, constantly invoked. He is the star of his own documentary. Brown, meanwhile, becomes a historical antecedent, a chapter in the biography of the idea rather than the author of its most famous manuscript. His association with the offense is remembered as that of a benefactor who provided the environment, not the engineer who provided the original schematics. This subtly frames Walsh as the true genius, the one who took some good ideas and made them legendary, while Brown is the capable executive who enabled him. It inverts the true creative order. The emotional weight of this is found in the nature of their achievements. Walsh's legacy is cinematic. The dramatic resurrection of the 49ers, the beautiful passes, the Super Bowl rings, the genius persona. It is a legacy of spectacular results. Brown's legacy, particularly concerning this offense, is one of foundational process. His contribution was the original radical hypothesis that you could win by prioritizing completion percentage over explosive plays, by systematizing the short pass. It was a conceptual leap, which is often harder to celebrate than a dramatic execution. Walsh provided the unforgettable execution. History loves the showman more than the scientist, even when the showman is using the scientist's breakthrough. The name West Coast Offense inherently celebrates the show, the sunshine, the championships, the style. It does not celebrate the gritty, pragmatic experiment in the laboratory that made the show possible. Furthermore, the name geographically alienates Brown in a deeply symbolic way. His entire football identity was of Ohio, Massillon, Cleveland, Cincinnati. To have his most enduring strategic child named for the opposite coast is a final cosmic joke. It severs the idea from its soil. When people think of this offense, they think of the Golden Gate Bridge, not the Ohio River, of Silicon Valley, not the Steel Valleys. This geographical rebranding makes Brown's connection feel academic, historical, while Walsh's feels organic and inherent. Walsh is the West Coast offense in the public mind. Brown is its interesting, distant relative from back east. The cruelest twist is that this diminishes the scope of Walsh's own genius as well. It traps him in the role of offensive innovator, when his true masterpiece was the holistic building of an organization, his standard of performance, his teaching. He was a CEO, a psychologist, and a leader. The offensive system was his most famous product, but not his only profound contribution. Yet, the popular legacy, cemented by the name, often reduces him to a playbook. Conversely, it reduces Brown to everything but the playbook. So, both men are partially misremembered, Walsh as a schematic wizard rather than an organizational visionary, and Brown as an organizational visionary rather than a schematic pioneer. The ironies compound within the very city of Canton. Here, in the heart of Ohio, just miles from where Paul Brown coached and conceived his system, the Hall of Fame stands. And within it, the term West Coast Offense is uttered, enshrining the geographical lie in the physical home of the man who conceived its truth. Both men have achieved the sport's highest honor, but the narrative that surrounds them, even there, is tilted by a name chosen for convenience, not accuracy. It is a testament to the fact that history is not just written by the victors, but also by the words they use to describe their victory. In Canton, their busts face each other, perhaps in silent acknowledgement of the shared truth. But outside, in the world that remembers, one man's name is on the system, and the other's is in the footnotes of its story. The ultimate legacy of the misnomer is this unequal distribution of glory, a subtle shading of memory that all the bronze in Ohio cannot fully correct. Cincinnati sits on a bend in the Ohio River, a city built on grit, on slaughterhouses and steel, on a practicality born of the Midwest. Its identity is not one of flash or self-mythology. It is a city that makes things, that works. And within this unassuming, blue-collar context lies one of the great cultural ironies in American sports. Here, in the home of hearty food and hard industry, the most elegant, cerebral, and finesse-oriented offensive system in football history was invented. It is Cincinnati's unclaimed jewel, a masterpiece forged in its foundries but displayed in a museum across the continent, bearing another city's name on the plaque. The relationship between the city, its football team, and this history is a story of paradoxical legacy, of a birthright never fully embraced, and of a quiet, stubborn pride that simmers beneath the surface of national obscurity. The Bengals franchise itself has always had a complicated, almost schizophrenic relationship with the offense it birthed. Under Paul Brown, the system was a tool of pragmatic survival, then a vehicle for contention. With Ken Anderson, a quarterback of sublime accuracy and intelligence, the offense reached its first local apex. Anderson was the purest expression of Brown's original vision. A processor, a distributor, a master of efficiency who in 1981, the very year the 49ers won their first title with it, executed the system to an MVP level and led the Bengals to the Super Bowl. That season should have been Cincinnati's defiant statement, proof that the system belonged as much to the banks of the Ohio as to the shores of the San Francisco Bay. Yet, the narrative never took hold. In the Super Bowl build-up, the story was Joe Montana and the charismatic 49ers. The Bengals were the foil, the AFC representative. Their offensive identity was noted, but it wasn't christened. It was just what they did. There was no cultural branding machine to label it the Heartland Offense or the River City System. It remained anonymous, a local dialect in a league, suddenly enthralled by a dazzling new accent from the coast. This inconsistency in legacy deepened in the decades that followed. After Paul Brown's passing and through various coaching regimes, the Bengals' connection to the offense waxed and waned. They drifted toward different philosophies, sometimes embracing a more vertical attack, sometimes struggling for any identity at all. There were flashes of the old system's principles, but never the sustained, institutional commitment that defined the 49ers. It was as if the child, having left home and found world fame, was occasionally visited by the family, who would try on its mannerisms but never fully live in its skin. This created a strange dissonance for knowledgeable fans. They could watch the 49ers or later the Packers or Broncos and see their own football heritage being celebrated globally, while their own team sometimes seemed like a distant cousin to it. The jewel was in the vault, but the local franchise didn't always wear the key around its neck. The cultural weight of this is profound. Cincinnati is not a city that asks for, or expects, credit for elegance. It is defined by substance over style, by work over words. The West Coast offense, as perceived, is all style. Timing, rhythm, precision, a kind of football ballet. That it emerged from the mind of Paul Brown, the ultimate no-nonsense systematizer, makes perfect sense internally. But externally, it clashes with the caricature of Midwestern football as a brute, ground-and-pound endeavor. This mismatch between the city's gritty self-image and the system's graceful reputation has perhaps contributed to the jewel remaining unclaimed. To loudly proclaim "we invented that" might feel, to the Cincinnati sensibility, like boasting or worse, like adopting an air of sophistication that feels alien. The city's pride is quieter, more resigned. It is the pride of the machinist who built a revolutionary engine, only to see the race car driver take all the glory and the name of his sunny hometown painted on the chassis. Yet, that pride is undeniable and deeply felt. Among the faithful, the history is a point of authentic connection and a subtle source of grievance. Older fans remember Virgil Carter and Ken Anderson, They remember the precise, methodical drives of the 1970s and early 80s. They know the truth. When they see a modern NFL team run a shallow cross or a sprint-out pass, they nod in recognition. It is a form of silent ownership. This knowledge creates a more nuanced, less starstruck relationship with the football pantheon. There is respect for Bill Walsh and Joe Montana, but it is tempered by the understanding that they were working from a Cincinnati blueprint. This isn't bitterness. It is the grounded perspective of the inventor watching the innovator. The cultural weight is carried not in parade, but in memory. Not in branding, but in the quiet certainty of being first. In recent years, with the emergence of a new Bengals era under coach Zach Taylor, who comes from the Sean McVay tree, which is itself a branch of the Mike Shanahan limb, which grows from the Walsh trunk, which is rooted in the brown soil, there has been a faint, poetic resonance. The offensive concepts have cycled back in evolved form to their city of origin. The use of quick game concepts, running back screens, and play-action bootlegs echoes the old rhythms. It is not a full-circle return to the pure system, but it is an echo of the family accent. For a new generation of fans, it is simply modern football. For those who remember, it is a ghost whispering from the sidelines of Riverfront Stadium. Cincinnati's unclaimed jewel, therefore, is not lost. It is just kept in a different kind of vault. It resides in the archival game film, in the memories of those who saw it born, and in the stubborn, factual pride of a city that knows what it built. The Bengals' inconsistent legacy with the offense mirrors the city's own relationship with its invention. Periods of embrace, periods of distance, but a fundamental, unshakable connection. The system elegance will forever be associated with California sunshine and championship confetti. But its soul, its foundational logic of efficiency and intellectual control, was forged in the pragmatic heart of the Midwest, in a city that understands the value of a thing well made, even if it never got to put its name on the final glittering product. The jewel belongs to Cincinnati. The world just borrowed it, and in doing so, forgot to read the maker's mark. Our journey began in the glow of a California dynasty, with a name that felt as natural as the Pacific breeze. It ends here on the banks of the Ohio River, in the quiet understanding that the most powerful stories are often the ones we get wrong. We have traveled from the sun-drenched legend of San Francisco back to the pragmatic origins in Cincinnati, from the glory of the catch to the forgotten completions of Virgil Carter, from the celebrated genius of Bill Walsh to the foundational architecture of Paul Brown. This was not a search for a guilty party, but a pursuit of a displaced truth. The West Coast offense is the ultimate sports misnomer, a title so deeply ingrained in our vocabulary that its inaccuracy feels like heresy. Yet, the evidence is incontrovertible. The system was conceived in the mind of a Midwestern pragmatist, born in the struggle of an expansion team, and only later carried to its spectacular maturity on the opposite coast. The name commemorates the site of its grandest celebration, not the location of its painstaking creation. This documentary has, at its heart, been an examination of how sports myths are formed and why they persist with such tenacity. The San Francisco story is objectively a better story. It is a Cinderella tale, a last-place team, a cerebral coach deemed too soft, a skinny quarterback deemed too weak, rising together to become a decade-defining dynasty. It has clear heroes, a dramatic arc, and a gorgeous setting. The Cincinnati Inception story is one of engineering, not fairy tales. It is about a legendary coach in exile, solving a math problem of roster weakness with cold logic. It is about incremental progress, about a high completion percentage as a moral victory. There is no confetti in that version. There are only chalkboards and game film and the slow, unglamorous work of building something sound. The human mind and the media machine that serves it will always gravitate toward the former. The myth persists because it is more satisfying, more cinematic, and easier to sell. It turns complexity into a simple, marketable legend. The West Coast genius who changed the game. But in choosing that cleaner story, we lose something vital. We lose the true nature of innovation. This series has argued that breakthrough ideas rarely spring, fully formed, from a single eureka moment in the spotlight. More often, they are forged in the shadows of necessity, through iteration and refinement, by problem solvers working within constraints. Paul Brown's innovation was a monumental conceptual leap. That football could be won through the systematic avoidance of risk, that the short pass could be a weapon of control as potent as any rushing attack. That idea was his alone. Bill Walsh's monumental contribution was to perfect the teaching of that idea, to add layers of psychological depth and artistic flourish, and to execute it with historically great personnel. One man invented the theory of flight. The other built the most beautiful plane and piloted it to glory. Our myth-making conflates the two acts, honoring the pilot while forgetting the physicist. This leads us to the uncomfortable, universal truth the story illustrates. History is written by the victors, and it is often written carelessly. The victors were the San Francisco 49ers. Their victories were so decisive, so aesthetically pleasing, and so perfectly timed for the rise of modern sports media that their narrative became irresistible. The term West Coast offense was not a conspiracy. It was a convenience that hardened into fact. In the rush to crown Walsh and Montana, the provenance of their tools was treated as a trivial detail. Paul Brown, sitting in his office in Cincinnati, became a victim of this careless historiography. His legacy was not stolen with malice, but gradually overshadowed by a brighter, shinier sequel to his own creation. This is how history often works, not through deliberate falsehoods, but through the overwhelming gravitational pull of a triumphant narrative that simplifies and distorts the messy, collaborative, and geographically dispersed reality of how things actually come to be. So what, then, is the ultimate meaning of correcting this record? It is more than a piece of football trivia. It is a reclamation of a different kind of legacy. It restores Paul Brown not just as a great organizer or a foundational figure, but as one of the most potent strategic innovators the game has ever known. It reframes Bill Walsh not as a solitary genius who invented a system from whole cloth, but as perhaps the greatest teacher and elucidator in football history, a man whose brilliance lay in his ability to master, articulate, and elevate an existing philosophy to its highest potential. And for the city of Cincinnati, it reclaims a point of profound cultural pride. That from its blue-collar ethos emerged an offense of remarkable elegance and intelligence, proving that beauty and brains are not the sole province of the coasts. The West Coast offense will forever bear its misleading name. Language, once set, is nearly impossible to change. But now, when we hear that term, we can understand it as a label, not a birth certificate. We can see it as a testament to two towering figures. Paul Brown, the architect who drafted the plans in the Midwest, and Bill Walsh, the master builder who erected the cathedral in the West. Their legacies are now, and forever, intertwined, not as inventor and copycat, but as foundational thinker and transformative executor. In the end, this story is about the nature of football legacy itself. Legacy is not a fixed monument. It is a story constantly being told and retold. It is vulnerable to the allure of a good yarn, to the magnetism of championships, to the shorthand of geography. The true legacy of this offense is not contained in its name, but in its pervasive, DNA-level influence on every snap taken in the modern NFL. It is in the quick game, the check down, the sanctity of the completion. That is Paul Brown's ultimate victory. His idea won. It conquered football. The fact that it did so under an assumed name is the final, poignant irony. A reminder that in sports, as in life, truth is often more complex and more interesting than the myth that replaces it. The light of California made the system famous, but its shadow, long and enduring, will always point back east, to the river city where it was first drawn in X's and O's on a coach's chalkboard, a solution to a problem, waiting for its time to become a legend.